Dratnos, can you please press Restless Blades?
That's a passive, idiot.
Is it really a passive?
Yeah, it's when you spend combo points.
Oh, well, I clearly don't know much about Rogue. Anyways, something that we saw today is the Rogue talent tree and the Hunter talent tree coming out. However, we didn't think that covering the Rogue and the Hunter talent tree was necessarily going to be the most impactful thing. We covered some of the other talent trees. We wanted to take a stab at talking about like raid buff meta and some of the interesting stuff that we saw come with the Rogue tree in Dragonflight, right?
Yeah, so the Rogue talent tree is coming with 2 potent effects that will affect parties and raids. The first being the Restless Crew, not the Restless Blades there, but further down there's Restless Crew.
This one. I found it.
Yeah, so whenever you spend combo points, you reduce the cooldowns not only of your own stuff, but also of all of your party members' major offensive by 0.2 seconds per combo point spent, which in practice, depending on how much haste and how the rotation feels compared to now, this would be something like maybe 20 seconds per minute of CDR per rogue in your party, and potentially stacking for each, I mean, almost certainly stacking for each outlaw in your party. So potentially a very powerful DPS increase for the other members of your party. If you got 3 outlaws in your group and you get 60 seconds off your major cooldown per minute, could be pretty big. Could you imagine effectively Moonkin on a 2-minute incarn instead of a 3-minute? And that lines up with Power Infusion that's still in the game as well.
Okay, so I mean we're gonna cover that in a second. In addition to that, they also have a trophic poison, which is an assassination one where it coats your weapon with a non-lethal poison that lasts for an hour. Each strike has a 30% chance of poisoning the enemy, reducing their damage by 3% for 10 seconds. I would say less impactful just as a whole, but I think that the fact that it seems relatively passive, it's really easy to just get the 3% damage reduction. That is quite nice.
I mean, it's Devo Aura, right? It's a Devo passive, but it won't trigger on environmental damage, which a lot of raid fights have a lot of stuff coded as environmental. But a lot of raid fights, all the damage is just sourced from the actual raid boss. And a 3% damage reduction against that is an ungodly amount of HPS if it actually showed up that way.
Exactly. I mean, people complain about Devo Aura all the time. Like, if it showed up as HPS, it would be Holy Paladin.
Yeah, just the passive, healing. Not the Aura Mastery as well. Just the passive 3%. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a big deal. So Rogue got a little bit surprisingly, effectively 2 raid buffs. I guess 1 party buff and 1 raid buff.
Yeah, not Rogue the class though. 2 different specs, right? Sin and Outlaw each got 1. Yeah,
exactly. And that's been met with, I guess, some differing opinions. First, we had this one from Max. One of the comments upset about this. This looks like good, unique raid utility, something that rogues desperately needed, a mixture of Wind Fury plus Night Fae Fairies. People were kind of surprised that they didn't get Smoke Bomb. I guess
I'm not surprised they didn't get Smoke Bomb. Smoke Bomb is kind of broken beyond belief in PvE content.
Some people are surprised that they didn't get Smoke Bomb.
They briefly gave us Smoke Bomb in a PTR cycle as the Conflict and Strife PvP talent, but then they took it away because that was not it. That ability breaks a lot of stuff in PvE.
And then another opinion, which I think is the one that most people are talking about, is like, reading the Rogue talent tree has ruined my day. They just get 2 raid buffs. Obviously, it's a little bit of a hyperbole, but what is going on? Feral Druid got drafted the Deep Focus. In addition to that, Druid did get Mark of the Wild. So this is the now, I guess, second class to get a raid buff.
I don't really... Yeah, I mean, it's different than Mark of the Wild, right? Like,
yeah,
I think
sure.
The damage reduction poison is definitely something that may be important on certain encounters, but the Restless Blades one, it is kind of more similar to Wind Fury, right? Where it like affects you and your party. So it stacks a little bit differently than raid buffs in that like multiple outlaw rogues are each still bringing value from their future Restless Blades, right? It's not like Chaos Brand, right? Where the first Demon Hunter brings it and the second Demon Hunter is bringing nothing. But yeah, it is moving towards this Dragonflight direction of like several, but not all specs have these cool effects that are very powerful. And also when you're thinking about your individual performance, if you're somebody that cares about that, that is definitely going to be something where we're moving out of a world where you can really compare yourself to people in other raids, because you're randomly going to have some of this stuff and they're randomly going to have some other of the stuff. And it's just, the top parses are obviously going to have all of it. And it's going to be rather neutralizing to the ability to really directly compare yourself, or really for some people it'll make it hard, I think, as well, to track their own progress and see whether they're playing better over time, because whether your damage goes up is going to be based on whether the outlaw rogue is playing outlaw or sin on a given fight in your group.
Yeah, it's really interesting that they're continuing to push towards this like raid buff meta, especially since the community's been kind of pushing back against raid buffs at all. So whenever Blizzard removed raid buffs, people didn't know if they were going to enjoy it or hate it. But throughout Legion, people realized that raid buffs were more annoying than they would have preferred. And then whenever they started to get brought back, it seemed like people so these are the raid buffs that are like actual raid buffs right now. These are the things that like you tangibly gain currently in Shadowlands, just as a buff, or like I guess battle res and lust, if you count those things. Some people would classify those as also like a raid buff.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't including like Wind Fury, Power Infusion,
exactly,
Resonating Arrow, Crit, or whatever, those sorts of things. But yeah, there's a lot of different effects that are sort of like that, and it definitely looks like they're in Dragonflight. They're going to amp it up further. Yeah.
So, how do you feel about Blizzard pushing further into this? Mark of the Wild making a return for Druid, Rogue getting one party buff, and then one, I would call it a raid buff for Assassin. What is your initial reaction to this? Because I think that I feel... I'll wait and see what you say first.
Yeah, definitely I'm mixed on it. I think that like the Restless Blades thing, that's cool. Sure. It's easy to imagine it being fun to play with. It's also easy to imagine it being very powerful and very polarizing as well, and kind of neutralizing a lot of the, like, making a lot of the value, going back to those days of like, do you have this perfect comp or not, rather than like how well are your players playing, being something that matters, right? Like we already see, like casual groups that just don't have a demon hunter or whatever and are missing out on 5% damage from that are, I think, the ones that are going to be the worst affected by this. Me personally, I mean, it'll probably be pretty fun. We'll probably have the ability to use a lot of these different things and have people reroll to whatever is best for them. I am worried for the specs that are not getting things. There are a lot of specs that are going to be left cold here because there are specs they've revealed that don't have these things, right? Like, the Hunter specs, there's not really a tangible raid buff type effect in there. Subtlety versus Outlaw and Assassination, right? Like if you're imagining a raid environment, Subtlety probably needs to be doing a lot more damage than Assassination to justify not bringing 3% damage reduction, or this Outlaw cooldown reduction effect, which probably represents huge DPS increases on the best couple people in your raid for it.
I mean, funnily enough, Enhancement Shaman didn't see much. Okay, so the Wind Fury Totem change was a change that they made to this expansion. We didn't see them very much in 9.0 and like the race roll first. They were probably still broken. We just didn't know. 9.1 comes around, and basically every guild has an Enhancement Shaman now. It's like, oh, wait, this one spec is adding enough damage to this one party of melee players in our group that it is providing the most damage to our whole entire guild because of this one totem that's invisible DPS. It's not necessarily a DPS that's attributed to them. And so this is like another thing that is it's this invisible DPS that's not being appropriately attributed to the correct players. And it's like something that people are complaining about Power Infusion as well. It's like, okay, the Power Infusion damage is attributed to the person that's getting the PI and not necessarily the priest that's providing it. And like that's something that people are complaining about, like parse culture and that kind of thing. Dude, people have been really at each other's throats about PI specifically. I think that this is just like a slightly better version of Power Infusion, but like, man, not by much.
Yeah, I mean, I take issues with effects like Power Infusion, with effects like the Restless Crew, not on the basis of parsing and stuff like that, so much as like the difference it creates between people running the good comps and people running the bad comps. And I feel like this pretty subtly, pretty hard, in a hard to see way, makes the guilds that are just kind of running what people play much worse off than the guilds that either happen to or re-roll to have the best comps every tier. And to some extent, re-rolling to have the best comp, like that is always going to be the best thing to do. But whenever there are really potent effects, like stacking the correct number of Power Infusions with the correct number of Power Infusion abusers, or stacking the correct number of Outlaw Rogues, and then when that get nerfed, swapping them all off, right? Those sorts of things mean that the guilds that are rolling with that are that are really chasing the meta are even better relative to the guilds that are just kind of, well, I've played Feral for 10 years and I'm playing Feral. Like those guilds I don't think deserves to get nerfed more, and I'm sad to see them getting nerfed more.
I guess the counterpoint is like, do you want the game to be more homogenized then? Like I don't know if I don't necessarily believe that, but that is definitely the counterpoint is like you removing this, you're trying to effectively homogenize the game more and make most of the specs more similar.
I'm down for specs having cool effects and stuff, and that's part of the thing. Like the Restless Crew effect, like that is cool.
Yeah.
And I like things being cool and interesting. I'm not sure I like Devo poison, right? Like 3% damage reduction poison. I'm not sure that's actually adding like cool gameplay to justify the negative effects it has on comps.
Or Mark of the Wild. I mean, literally, this is an actual raid buff coming back, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I'm not sure. Like I'm sure there are some cases where the fun is worth it, and I'm down to have those. But I'm also a little bit worried about like is this outlaw effect going to be balanced to the point where it is good and fun, but not OP and stacked,
oppressive and have 5 rogues
versus also like, is it going, or in the spot of being like really bad and not something you worry about and just outlaws bad and you don't play it anyways, right? Like to me, it seems like hitting that sweet spot is really hard for effects of that sort. And it's
weird because like Wind Fury Totem in particular, like there is a world where this Restless Crew thing for Outlaw, like you could run 5 rogues. Like what's the downside? What's necessarily the downside?
5 rogues all buffing each other, or is it better to have 4 rogues buffing each other and then a 5th person in the party,
exactly,
such as a Demonology Warlock that will probably be able to just extend their Tyrants every time if Tyrant continues to work the way it currently does and be able to scale infinitely. That will be something I will be testing on Dragonflight Alpha if that works that way, because I think you might be able to scale a Tyrant up to very high damage numbers off of it.
And so this is the problem with it too. So like with Wind Fury, at least it's like stacking Wind Fury buffs is like really doesn't do anything, right? Like you're not gaining anything by having multiple.
Well, the second Wind Fury is still good in a lot of raid comps. Like we saw Liquid in the Race to World First last time using multiple enhancement shamans, and like
they're not gonna be in the same party.
Right, they're not in the same party, but like the second one in the raid is good, and the third one in the raid is good. But yeah, you're saying like within the party, the more outlaws, the better.
Exactly. Then this is like something that's a little bit different. I think that for me, like obviously it does homogenize the game to remove this kind of stuff, but I think that we're at a point where like people kind of just want to play with their friends and they don't want to feel limited by 5% stamina. They don't want to be limited by 5% attack power, even if it's just like a in their head kind of DPS difference. It's not, by the way. It's like it like in Raid in particular, in Mythic Plus, it may be just like fake gains, but in Raid in particular, like Warrior, just the battle shout, like the 0 warriors to the first warrior, that's going to account for something like 2% of your group's damage. And like that is by them bringing that on their own, they're going from effectively like doing 8% to doing 10%. And that is just a massive swing that they are bringing on their own. And so like for raids, it's like people just want to kind of play with their friends. And this is why you saw people take issue with the Covenant specific dungeon buffs as well, is like people don't want to feel like they have to be locked into these specific covenants for dungeons, or like they're not able to necessarily play with their friends because their comp is a lot worse, so like substantially worse for dungeons or particularly for raid. And it's like I think that like having that balance where you keep talking about where it's like I have to like fielding the best comp versus just a comp, like I don't think that the delta should be that high. I think it should be based up mostly off player skill.
Yeah, I hate the effect it has again on like the second Demon Hunter value in the raid versus the first is so it's such a wide chasm that like I don't believe that 0 Demon Hunter comps and 2 Demon Hunter comps should be that much worse than 1 Demon Hunter comps. But that being said, I think moving to a world where like every spec has some amount of interesting raid utility or party utility rather than like 8 specs, it's all 38. I think that could be better, but it doesn't like, I mean, we're talking about the rogues getting these things, but the Hunter tree just came out and Hunter's
DK doesn't have it either.
Anything. DK has AMD, but yeah, it's not in there. In the same
sure. DK has battle res and AMZ, but that is not. I would argue that that's like not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, I think you can make an argument for AMZ, but sure, yeah, definitely not. Battle res, especially in raid, you always got that.
Exactly, and it's one of those things that it's I just don't think it's on the same plane as like 5% stamina or
But
like
if
a
we were
Devo
moving to a
aura.
world where they were like, hey, we are interested in like everybody having something in this space, and we are interested in balancing those somewhat more frequently than at the once per expansion level, then I think I could be down for that. I think that could be better than the Shadowlands status quo.
Oh man, is it that much better? I think that there's going to be I think that if every single spec has something unique, then we're starting to run into issues. People talked about how they wanted like multiple people to bring stamina, wanted multiple people to bring attack power. Like the raid buffs could stay, but if like 3 classes brought stamina, 3 classes brought attack power,
I'd be down for that for sure. Yeah,
yeah, I think that makes it a lot better.
You know, that also is pretty homogenizing as well, right? Like at that point, why not just take those things away? Because then it will make it feel even worse to randomly be in a group that doesn't have the priest or the whatever other thing brings it.
Then the argument here is like, why not just make lust either only on a mage or only on a shaman, or alternatively you just make drums effectively the same thing because it's already on three classes, right? I don't agree with this. Like this is a dumb argument. Like but you see my point.
Right. I'm just saying, like, I don't know. I think that if we're willing to homogenize that far, why not just actually get the full benefit, and not just do a half measure? But I don't think they are interested in that anyway. So it's a kind of
I preferred whenever they removed it. I initially was like not super into the idea of them removing class buffs because I thought that they were cool. But then after playing like a full expansion with them without class buffs, I was like, oh, all right, I'm kind of into this because you're able to play with your friends. You're able to kind of mix and match these compositions and feel less bad about like not having them. And then they started adding them back, and I was like, oh, this kind of sucks. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hope that they reach a spot where it feels okay, but like
I think the outlaw one is a case of like, maybe this is actually a fun one to play with, and if it's a fun effect to play with, that can maybe make up for whatever bad effects it has on the metagame to be worth it for the game. It's just like most of the effects that are like, this is a pick a small single digit number percent buff to pick a stat is like, okay, who cares, right? Like I'm not having a more fun experience of pressing my buttons. I'm just looking at the meters and it's like, oh, I wish I had a warrior in this raid. Oh, I have 3 warriors in this raid. 2 of them aren't doing anything.
I think that Blizzard needs to be very cautious with this in particular.
Yeah, I'm sure that I think that the Restless Crew one in particular, like this one is pretty clear how we can break it. And I'm sure as soon as the alpha comes out, we will be attempting to break this. And my guess is that this will get removed or nerfed to the point that that's not going to actually, because it's so clear how busted you could get with 4 outlaw rogues in the group.
I actually lend issue to this just being in the Sin spec tree. Like,
oh yeah, that one is going to make it to the game and be very good and fly under the radar completely, and because it doesn't show up on details at all.
Why is this in the Sin spec tree? Like
it's poison. Sins are poison stuff,
This is like so polarizing. All right, whatever. It's fine.
Yeah, so good news for guilds with rogue mains. For sure. Very bad news for guilds with hunter mains. Sorry about that, but that's the world of the raid buff meta.
Oh, unfortunate. All right. I guess we'll be back for the video next week. Hopefully the alpha is soon and we're able to see all of the classes, spec trees and stuff like that. I'm really interested to see how everything lands. And is Evoker going to have a raid buff?
It would be pretty weird for them to launch a new class and then have it get crowded out by the 20 specs that have raid buffs. So,
well, what if they gave mana back or something? We'll see.
Mana.
Anyways,
who cares? That's a healer thing.
HP regen?
Maybe, but that also sounds like a healer thing.
Raid-wide HP regen sounds broken.
If it's not helping me do damage or survive one-shots, I don't care.
All right, we'll be back next week. See you guys then.